The third ball of the season was already an hour old when the Duke of Ravensmere walked the length of the ballroom and stopped in front of the girl who had come to carry away the broken glass. She had been kneeling. That was the part the room would repeat for a fortnight afterward, in carriages and in morning rooms and over cold chocolate at 11 the next day. A footman had dropped a tray near the terrace doors, and a shard had gone skidding across the parquet into the crush of slippers, and a young woman in grey wool with her sleeves pushed to the elbow had come out from the service corridor with a cloth in her hands and knelt to gather it before someone's foot found it. Her name was Hannah Croft. She was 23 years old. She had worked in the scullery of Ravensmere House for 2 years and 4 months, and in that time no one above stairs had spoken her name aloud except the housekeeper, who said it kindly, and the Dowager Duchess, who said it as though it were a stain on a cuff. The room went quiet in stages. First the couples nearest the terrace, then the orchestra, which faltered on a phrase and did not recover it. Hannah looked up, because everyone else had gone still, and stillness in that house had always meant that the dowager had entered a room. She looked up and found instead a pair of boots. She did not know, and above them a dark blue coat, and above that a face she had seen perhaps 4 times in 28 months, always at a distance. Always from the wrong side of a door. "Stand up," the Duke said. His voice was not loud. It carried anyway, the way certain voices do when a room has already decided to listen. She stood. Her cloth was still in her hand, and there was a shard of crystal wrapped in it, and she was conscious in a way that stopped her breath of the wool of her dress against 600 pounds of Brussels lace to her left. "Give that to a footman," he said. "Then give me your hand." Behind him at the head of the room, the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere lowered her fan a half-inch. It was the only motion she made. It was enough that the woman beside her turned to look at her, and then away, and then at the floor. What the room did not know, and what Hannah did not know, and what the Dowager had spent 11 years believing she alone knew, was that there was a sealed paper in a solicitor's strongbox in Chancery Lane with Hannah Croft's mother's name written across the face of it in a dead man's hand. She gave the cloth to the footman. Her fingers were shaking. She put her hand in the Duke's, because a scullery maid in that house did not refuse a Duke anything, and because some part of her that she would be ashamed of later had wanted to know what his glove felt like. Stay with her. She does not understand yet what she has just walked into, and she will need someone to have watched from the beginning. 6 weeks earlier, in the last cold week of March, Hannah had been carrying coal up the back stairs of Ravensmere House at 5:30 in the morning when she first heard herself described. She had stopped on the landing to shift the scuttle to her other hand. The door to the small breakfast room stood open 2 inches. Inside, the Dowager Duchess was taking her chocolate at an hour when no one else in London was awake, which she did every day of her life, and Lady Prudence Thorne was sitting with her, which Lady Prudence did 4 mornings a week and had done since October. "He does not go to the Hartleys," the Dowager said. "He does not go to the Bellamys. He goes to the library, and he goes to the stables, and he sits with that horse until midnight, and when I ask him what he intends for the season, he tells me he intends nothing." "He is grieving still," Lady Prudence said. Her voice was gentle. Everything about Lady Prudence was gentle, in the way that a very well-made knife is quiet. "He is not grieving. He is sulking. Grief has a term, and his has run out. A cup returned to a saucer. Do you know what he?" asked Mrs. Dean. "Last week. He asked her the name of the scullery girl. The scullery girl. Prudence. He has not asked me the name of a marriageable woman in 4 years, and he asked the housekeeper the name of the creature who scrapes the pots." Hannah's hand went white on the handle of the scuttle. "Perhaps he had a complaint of her." "He had no complaint of her. That is precisely what alarms me." A pause, of exactly the right length. "She is a scullery maid. She is nothing. She is a pair of hands in a basement, and she will be a pair of hands in a basement when she is 50. And if my son has begun to notice the furniture, then the season has become an emergency. She is nothing." Hannah carried the coal up the remaining 11 stairs. She did not spill any. Ha! She had learned a long time ago that the trick of surviving a thing said about you was to keep your hands busy while it went through you. And hers had been busy for 2 years, and she was very good at it now. At the top of the stairs, she set the scuttle down and stood for a moment with her palms flat against her apron. Her mother had been a governess. That was the part nobody in the house knew, and the part Hannah did not say, because saying it would have made her ridiculous, and a scullery maid could survive being nothing, but could not survive being ridiculous. Eliza Croft had taught the daughters of a Yorkshire gentleman for 9 years, and had read Latin, and had a hand like copperplate, and had died of a fever in a lodging house in Bloomsbury when Hannah was 19, leaving her daughter a locked wooden box, a debt of £41, and a name that opened no door in England. The debt was why Hannah scrubbed pots. She had paid £32 of it in 28 months. She had 9 left. The box she had never opened, because the key had gone into her mother's grave in her mother's hand, and Hannah had put it there herself and had not been able to make her fingers take it back out again. By 8 o'clock she was at the sink with her sleeves up and the water going grey, and the day was the same as every day, and that should have been the end of it. It was not, because at 9:15, the Duke of Ravensmere came down into the kitchen. Dukes did not come down into kitchens. Mrs. Dean made a sound like a kettle. The cook dropped a spoon. Hannah, who had her arms in a copper pan up to the elbow, did the only thing available to a person in her position, which was to become as still and as small as the room would permit. He was looking for a book. That was what he said. He said a volume of his father's had been carried down by mistake with a tray, and he had come to find it, and he said it in the level tone of a man who has decided in advance exactly how many words a thing will require. The book was on the dresser. Everyone in the room could see the book on the dresser. He did not go to the dresser. He stood in the middle of the kitchen for a moment longer than a man looking for a book needed to stand anywhere, and his eyes went once across the room and stopped on the sink. "Your hands are in that water," he said. Hannah said nothing. There did not seem to be a question in it. "It is scalding." "Yes, Your Grace." "Then take them out." She took them out. Her hands came up red to the wrist, steaming faintly in the cold air of the kitchen, and she held them away from her apron because she did not want to wet it, and she looked at the flagstones because looking at him was not available to her. He took the book from the dresser. He went to the door. He stopped there with his hand on the frame and did not turn around. "Huh! There is a cloth in the still room," he said. "Cold. Use it." Then he was gone, and Mrs. Dean stared at Hannah as though she had grown a second head, and the cook picked up her spoon, and the kitchen resumed. Hannah looked at her own hands. They were shaking, and they had not been shaking from the heat. There is a particular cruelty in a house like Ravensmere, and it is not the work. The work is honest. The cruelty is the arithmetic. Hannah rose at 4:30. She lit fires. She carried water. She scoured 17 copper pans a day, and the lye took the skin off her knuckles in October. And it did not grow back properly until March. For this she was paid £9 a year and given a bed in a room under the roof, with 2 other girls and as much bread as she wanted. And by the standards of London in that decade she was fortunate, and she knew she was fortunate, and knowing it did not make the arithmetic stop. £9 a year. £9 still owed, which meant that if she spent nothing at all, not a ribbon, not a coach fare, not a penny to the girl who mended her only other dress, she would be free of her mother's debt in 1 year, exactly, at the age of 24, with nothing. That was the shape of her life, and she had made her peace with the shape of it. What she had not made peace with was the box. It sat under her bed in a canvas sack. It was 9 inches by 6, oak, banded in iron, and her mother had kept it on the shelf above the fire in Bloomsbury, and had told her twice, in the last week in a voice already going thin, that when the time came Hannah was to take it to a man named Whitcomb in Chancery Lane. Hannah had never gone. She had been 19 and grieving, and there had been £41 owed to a landlord who wanted it in a fortnight, and going to a solicitor in Chancery Lane with a box she could not open, wearing a dress she had slept in, had seemed to her then like walking into a room to be laughed at. So she had taken a place in a kitchen instead, because a kitchen would have her and the box had gone under the bed. She thought about it perhaps once a month. She thought about it that night, after he had told her to take her hands out of the water, and she could not have said why. 3 days later, the dowager began the season in earnest. Lady Prudence was installed in the blue bedroom on the second floor. She was 22. She had $8,000 a year, and a face like a Dutch painting, and a manner so exactly calibrated that 4 separate mothers that spring described her as restful. She played the pianoforte competently, and she rode competently, and she had been raised from the cradle in the certain knowledge that she was the correct choice, which is a thing that gets into a person's posture and never entirely leaves it. Hannah saw her twice a day, going up the back stairs with the water, through the gap in a door that was never quite shut. She saw the Duke and Lady Prudence in the long gallery on the 4th of April, standing 11 feet apart in front of a portrait of his father, and the Duke's hands were behind his back, and he was looking at the portrait and not at her, and Lady Prudence was saying something about the light in the room. She saw them in the drawing room on the 6th, and he was standing at the window. She saw them at the foot of the stairs on the 8th, and he had already begun to move past her before she had finished her sentence. He was not cruel to Lady Prudence. He was worse than cruel. He was absent, in the way that a man is absent from a room he has agreed to stand in. And Hannah, carrying water past the doorway with her eyes down, found that she understood exactly what she was looking at, and hated herself for the small hot thing that turned over in her chest when she understood it. On the 11th of April, the Duke's ward arrived. His name was Thomas. He was 7 years old, and he was the son of the Duke's dead sister, and he came from Ravensmere Park in a carriage with a nurse, who was dismissed within a week, for reasons the servants' hall discussed with relish, and after she was gone the boy simply existed in the house, the way a cat exists, in whatever room had a fire. He found the kitchen on the 2nd day. He found Hannah on the 3rd. He was not permitted in the kitchen. Mrs. Dean said so twice, and he came anyway, and sat on the flour bin with his heels knocking against it, and watched Hannah scour pans in perfect silence for 40 minutes. On the 4th day he said, "Why are your hands like that?" "Because of the soap," Hannah said. "Does it hurt sometimes?" "Then why do you do it?" "Because the pans are dirty," Hannah said, "and someone has to make them clean. And if I do not do it, someone else will have to. And her hands will look like this instead of mine." Thomas considered this with great seriousness. "That is a stupid reason," he said. "It is the only one I have." He came every day after that. He was a strange, thin, exact little boy who had lost his mother at 5 and his father at 6, and had been passed between 3 houses since, and who had learned, the way such children do, to be perfectly quiet in the presence of adults and to trust none of them. He did not talk about his mother, he talked about horses, and about the Roman kings of which he could name 7, and about whether it was true that a person could be hanged for stealing a sheep, but not a duck. Hannah gave him bread. She let him stir things. She corrected his Latin once without thinking, and then went cold all over, and turned back to the sink, and Thomas said nothing at all about it, but the next day he brought a book down with him and put it on the flour bin and did not explain. And Hannah read 4 pages of it aloud to him while her hands were drying. And after that it was simply a thing they did. On the 2nd of May, the boy was found in the kitchen by the Dowager Duchess. She came down herself. That was the measure of it. She stood in the doorway in gray silk with her hand on the frame, and she looked at her grandson sitting on a flour bin with a book open on his knees, and she looked at the scullery maid standing at the sink with her sleeves up, and the temperature of the room dropped 11 degrees. Thomas upstairs. He went. He looked back once from the door, which cost him something, and Hannah saw it cost him something and could do nothing about it. The dowager did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice, She had been born in 1768, and had married a duke at 19, and had buried him at 41, and had run a house of 40 servants and an estate of 11,000 acres for 20 years afterward, without ever once raising her voice because she had never needed to. "Look at me," she said. Hannah looked at her. "You have been feeding my grandson bread in a basement." "Yes, Your Grace." And reading to him. "Yes, Your Grace." "Do you know what you are?" Hannah said nothing. "You are a pair of hands," the dowager said not unkindly, which was the terrible part. "That is not an insult. It is a description. This house requires 7 pairs of hands in the basement, and yours is one of them, and I have no objection to you whatever. In your place. That child is the ward of a duke. In 11 years he will take a seat that his grandfather held, and his great-grandfather before him. He does not require a friend in a scullery. He requires a tutor, and a school, and the habit of his own class, and every hour he spends on that flour bin is an hour spent unlearning what he will need to survive." She let that stand for a moment. "You are nothing," she said. "I say it without malice. Half the world is nothing. The trouble begins when nothing forgets it." Then she went up the stairs, and Hannah stood at the sink with her arms in the water and did not cry, because she had not cried since Bloomsbury, and had rather lost the trick of it. Thomas did not come to the kitchen for 9 days. On the 10th day it rained, and the Duke of Ravensmere found the boy in the stable yard at 7 in the morning without a coat, standing in the rain and refusing to come inside. And the Duke could not move him, and the grooms could not move him, and at length someone sent for the housekeeper, and the housekeeper sent, because she was a woman of considerable judgment, for Hannah. Hannah came out into the yard in her apron, with her hair coming down. She did not speak to the boy at first. She stood beside him in the rain and looked at what he was looking at, which was nothing, which was a wall. "The pans are dirty," she said at last. Thomas did not turn his head. "So?" "So someone has to make them clean, and I am standing in a yard." A long moment. "She said you were nothing," Thomas said. "She did. Is it true?" Hannah crouched down in the mud beside him, which ruined her apron, which was one of 2. "It is true that I scrub pans," she said. "It is true that I have 9 pounds in the world, and I owe all 9 of them. It is true that if I dropped dead in that basement this morning, there is not a person in this house above the stairs who could tell the magistrate my name." She wiped the rain off his face with her thumb. "None of that is a description of you. You are 7, and you have lost more than anyone your size should be asked to carry. And you are standing in a yard in the rain, because it is the only room in England where nobody can tell you to be quiet. I know. I have stood in a great many yards." Thomas's chin went. He did not make a sound. "Come inside," Hannah said. "The fire is lit. I will read to you, and if anyone objects, I will tell them you compelled me, and they will believe it, because you are a duke's ward, and I am a pair of hands." He came inside. She did not know that the Duke of Ravensmere had been standing in the door of the tack room from the moment she crouched down. She did not know that he stayed there until they had gone in. She did not know that he stood alone in that doorway for some time afterward, with the rain coming off the eaves, looking at the place in the mud where her knees had been. He knew, standing there, precisely what he was looking at. He had spent 4 years being very careful not to look at anything. That evening, he did not dine with his mother. The Duke of Ravensmere was 34 years old. He had inherited at 29. He was, by the reckoning of the season, the most eligible man in England, and by his own reckoning he was a man serving a sentence, and the 2 facts had never once been reconciled in public. The thing he did not speak of had happened in November of the year. He inherited. His sister, Cecilia, had written to him from Ravensmere Park. She had married a man of no fortune against the family's wish, and the dowager had closed the door. And Cecilia had written to her brother in November, asking him to come, and he had not gone. He had been in London settling the estate, and the letter had been one of a great many letters, and he had put it in his coat and had meant to answer it on the Thursday. And on the Wednesday she had died of a fever in a house with 1 fire in it, in a village 9 miles from 11,000 acres of his own land. The letter had asked for a doctor. It had asked for nothing else. He had read it for the first time properly on the Friday, in a carriage going north too late. He carried it still. It lived in the breast of his coat, folded in 4, worn soft as cloth at the creases, and in 4 years he had not shown it to a living soul, and had not been able to burn it. And the only person in England who knew it existed was a solicitor named Whitcomb of Chancery Lane, who had drawn up in the January following an instrument that the Duke had not looked at since. You have watched him cross a ballroom by now, and you know how this ends, and there is a pleasure in knowing. Stay for the how. Because the how is where the dowager comes in. On the 14th of May, she moved. She did it the way she did everything, which is to say, correctly. She summoned her son to the small breakfast room at 9:30, and she informed him that she had spoken to Lord Thorne, and that Lord Thorne was agreeable, and that an announcement in the 2nd week of June would be received by the world as entirely natural, and that Thomas would go to Eton in September, and that the boy's habit of the basement would be corrected before then by the simple expedient of removing the basement's attraction. Meaning what? The Duke said. Meaning the girl goes not, turned off. I am not a monster, and I do not create martyrs. She is to be found a place. There is a household in Kent that requires a scullery maid, and I will write the character myself, and it will be a good one. No. The dowager set down her cup. It was the first time in 5 years that her son had said that word to her in a flat voice with nothing after it. And she was a woman of great intelligence, and she understood in that moment with absolute clarity and considerable calm exactly what she was fighting. I see, she said. You do not. I have run this house since before you could ride. I assure you that I do. She folded her hands. You have noticed her. Very well. Men notice. Notice her in a manner that does not require me to explain it to the Thornes, and I will not say a word. And I will not think less of you, because I am not a fool about the world. Be careful, he said. I am always careful. It is why we still have Ravensmere. She looked at him steadily. She is a scullery maid. She is nothing. If you elevate nothing, the world does not conclude that she was something all along. The world concludes that you are unwell, and that Thomas's guardianship might be reviewed, and that everything I have held together for 20 years was held by a woman who could not manage her own son. He left the room. He did not go to the stables. He went to his study, and he sat down, and he wrote a letter to Chancery Lane, and he sent it out that morning by a groom, and it was the second most consequential thing he did that spring. The most consequential thing he did was 5 days later in the library at 11 at night. Hannah had been sent up with coal. That was all. The fire in the library was banked, and the housekeeper had sent her because the footmen were gone to bed, and she had come in with the scuttle expecting an empty room. And the room was not empty. He was standing at the shelves. There was one candle. The rain had come back. She stopped in the doorway. Your Grace, I will come back. Come in, he said. She came in. She knelt at the grate, and she did the fire, and it took perhaps 90 seconds. And in 90 seconds a person can become extremely aware of exactly where another person is standing in a room without looking at them once. When she stood, he had not moved. Miss Croft, he said. Her name, her whole name, said properly in a duke's mouth, in a library, at 11 at night. Nobody had said it since Bloomsbury. Hannah's hand found the back of a chair and gripped it, and she was grateful past speech for the chair. Your Grace in the yard, he said. With Thomas you told him you had £9 in the world, and owed all 9. I should not have said it in his hearing. Is it true? Yes. He crossed the room. He stopped 3 feet away, which was 6 inches nearer than any man of his rank had ever stood to her, and she could smell the rain on his coat, and something under it, and her heart was going in her throat so loudly that she was certain the sound of it was audible in the room. Your mother, he said. Mrs. Dean says she was a governess. She was? Latin and Greek? and a hand better than mine. And she left you nothing." "She left me a box," Hannah said. Before she had decided to say it, "I cannot open it. The key is in her grave. I put it there." She had never said that aloud to anyone. She heard herself say it and felt the floor tilt. He was very still. His hand had gone, without his appearing to notice, to the breast of his coat, flat against it, the way a man presses a place that aches. "Why did you not have it forced?" "Because I was 19, Hannah said, "and there was a debt, and the box was the only thing left in the world that still had her hands on it. And if I broke it open, and it was empty, then that would have been the end of her." Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that afterward. "So I did not open it, and I took a place in a kitchen. And I have been the sort of person who did not open it for 4 years. And I would rather you did not look at me like that, Your Grace, because I have managed perfectly well being nothing. And I do not think I could manage it again if I stopped." The candle guttered. "Do not use that word," he said. "It is not mine. It was given to me. I am aware," he said, "of who gave it to you." He was near enough now that she could see the muscle at his jaw. Near enough that when he raised his hand, she did not step back, and that failure to step back was the largest thing she had ever done. His hand stopped, 2 inches from her face. It hung there in the candlelight, and neither of them breathed. "There is a thing I want," he said, and his voice was not level at all, "that I have no right to and no defense for. And I have spent 5 weeks arranging my days around a basement staircase, like a boy of 19. I am telling you because you have told me something true, and you are owed one in exchange. That is the whole of it. I will not touch you in my mother's house while you draw wages in it. You may go." Hannah did not go. She stood there with his hand 2 inches from her face, and the rain on the glass and her own pulse going like a bird in her wrist, and she said quite steadily, "Then dismiss me, Your Grace." He shut his eyes. "Go," he said, "please." She went. She got to the servants' stair before her legs gave out, and she sat down on the 3rd step in the dark and put her face in her hands. And she stayed there for a quarter of an hour, and she was not crying, but she had lost the ability to stand. 9 days later, the dowager gave a ball. It was the 3rd of the season, and it was by design magnificent. 400 candles, an orchestra of 14. The thorns at the head of the room, and Lady Prudence in ice blue silk beside the dowager's chair, and the announcement, everybody understood, expected before supper. Hannah was not in the ballroom. Hannah was in the basement, with her arms in a copper pan, and she would have stayed there, and history would have been different, except that at 10:30, a footman dropped a tray of glasses near the terrace doors. The rest of it the room repeated for a fortnight. She knelt. He crossed the floor. He said, "Stand up and give me your hand," and the orchestra lost the phrase. The dowager rose from her chair. She was 71 years old, and she had never in her life moved quickly in public, and she did not move quickly then. She came down the room at the pace of a woman going to correct a footman's error, and she stopped beside her son, and she said in a voice pitched exactly loud enough to reach the thorns, and no further, "Ravensmere. She is a scullery maid. She is nothing. Let her go." 3 times. Once in a breakfast room over chocolate. Once in a kitchen doorway with a boy on a flour bin. Once here, in 400 candles, in front of everyone. Hannah felt her hand start to pull free. The Duke did not let it. He turned his head and looked at his mother, and the room, which had been silent, discovered that there were degrees of silence. Then he raised his other hand, and there was a paper in it, and he gave it not to the dowager but to the old man standing 3 feet behind her, who had come in from the hall in a plain black coat at some point in the last minute, and whom perhaps 6 people in the room recognized. "Mr. Whitcomb," the Duke said, "read the name." The solicitor put on his glasses. He was in no hurry. He had been a solicitor for 41 years, and he had waited a long time for this particular piece of paper to be worth anything to anyone. "The instrument is dated the 9th of January, 1813, he said. "It settles upon the daughter of Eliza Croft, formerly governess to the Marchmain family of Yorkshire, the sum of £12,000 in the freehold of the Bloomsbury property, in trust to be conveyed upon her attaining her majority or upon her being found, whichever should be the later. He turned the page. It is signed by the late Duke of Ravensmere. It was witnessed by his son. It has been in my strong-box for 11 years, unclaimed, because nobody was looking. The Dowager's fan came down. It did not snap. It simply came down, all at once, as though the hand holding it had forgotten the instruction, and hung at the end of her arm, and her mouth opened and shut. "That is not," she said. "That instrument was—" "You knew of it," Whitcomb said without heat. "That instrument was a provision for a servant's child. It was a provision," the Duke said, "made by my father, for the daughter of the woman who taught Cecilia to read. He made it in the last year of his life, and he told me why. He said that he had let one person of consequence in this house be thrown away because she was inconvenient, and that he would not have it happen twice." He looked at his mother, and his voice did not rise. "The one he let be thrown away was Cecilia. She died 9 miles from our land asking me for a doctor. I have her letter. I have carried it since. You have known where that instrument was for 11 years, and you did not look for the child, because you did not think the child was worth the hour. 400 candles, 14 musicians with their bows on their knees, 200 people not moving. Hannah stood in the middle of it, in grey wool, with her hand in a duke's hand, and understood approximately none of it except that a man in a black coat had just said her mother's name out loud in a ballroom. The Duke turned to her. He did not make a speech. That was the thing the room remembered longest afterward, in the carriages and the morning rooms. He had 200 witnesses and every right to a speech. And what he did instead was look at her for a moment, and then say it. "Marry me, not the money, you." 6 words, and then 2 more. The silence afterward lasted long enough for a candle to gutter, at the far end of the room. Then Lady Prudence Thorne, 22 years old, correct her whole life, did the one genuinely admirable thing of her career. She rose from her chair beside the Dowager, and she crossed to Hannah, and she said clearly so that the room could hear it, "I hope you will let me call on you." And the room turned. Not all at once. It turned the way a field of wheat turns in a wave from the doors inward, and somewhere near the orchestra, a woman began to applaud, and was joined, and the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere stood alone in the middle of her own ballroom with her fan hanging from her wrist. She looked at Hannah. Whatever passed across that face, it was not malice, it was the specific, appalled arithmetic of a woman recalculating 20 years in 11 seconds. "Croft," she said. Her voice had come apart at the edges. "She taught Cecilia. She sat in my morning room. I have. She sat in my morning room." "Yes," Hannah said. The Dowager's hand went out and found the back of a chair. Nobody laughed at her. That was the Duke's doing. And he did it by the simple method of turning his back on the whole room and putting his hand at Hannah's elbow, and walking her out through the terrace doors into the air, and leaving his mother the only mercy available, which was the chance to sit down unobserved. The box was forced on a Tuesday in Chancery Lane by a locksmith who charged 2 shillings. Inside were 3 things. A miniature of a young woman with Hannah's mouth painted badly, in a case worn smooth. A packet of 9 letters in a hand, like copperplate, addressed to her mother over 4 years, signed Cecilia, and folded flat at the bottom a sheet of paper in a different hand entirely, dated 1813, which read, "If ever this box is opened, and I am dead, take it to Whitcomb, Chancery Lane. He has money that is yours. Your mother would not take it from me. She said she would rather you earned it. She was a better woman than every person I have ever seated at my table." Our Hannah read it standing up, in a solicitor's office, in a grey wool dress. She sat down on the floor. They married in September in the church at Ravensmere Park, before 11 people, which was 10 more than Hannah had expected, and 300 fewer than the Dowager had once planned. The Dowager came. She sat in the second pew. She had written to Hannah in July, a letter of 4 lines which said only that she had been wrong in a manner she did not intend to describe at length, that she had ordered Whitcomb's papers copied for the estate records, and that if her daughter-in-law had any use for a woman who knew where every deed on 11,000 acres was kept, she was to be found in the Dower house, Hannah wrote back. It took her 3 drafts. The letter she sent said, "Come to dinner on Sundays, Thomas asks for you." By December there was snow on the park. The Dower house was a quarter of a mile off, across the White, and the light in its window went out at 10 every night, and Hannah could see it from the small sitting room where she had taken to reading in the evenings, because the great library was too cold in winter, and she had never entirely lost the habit of choosing the room with the fire in it. Thomas was on the hearthrug with his Roman kings. He had 11 now. Her husband was in the chair opposite with his boots off, which he did not do anywhere else in England, and he had been reading the same page for some minutes. "You are not reading," Hannah said. "No." The fire moved. Outside, the snow came down across the park in the dark, past the window, in no particular hurry. On the table beside her, in a case worn smooth by somebody else's thumb, a badly painted young woman with Hannah's mouth looked out at a room she had never seen. Hannah put her hand on it. It was warm from the fire. £9, she said to nobody in particular. Her husband looked up. "What?" "Nothing," she said and smiled, and did not take her hand off it. "I have paid it. If Hannah's long walk up from that basement stayed with you, sit with it a moment, before you go. Thank you for staying to the end."